Life's like a road that you travel along. There's one day here and the next day gone. Sometimes you bend, sometimes you stand, sometimes you turn your back to the wind. There's a world outside every darkened door. The blues won't haunt you anymore. For the brave are free and lovers soar. Come ride with me to the distant shore.
Life is the highway.
I'm gonna ride all night long.
One day, James was waiting at the station for Edward and his train to come in. This made him cross. Late again? Edward laughed, and James fumed away. Dun, 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 dun. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered. Edward is impossible, he grumbled to the others. He clanks about like a lot of old iron. And he's so slow, he makes us wait. Thomas and Percy were indignant. Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in the race any day. Really, said James. I would like to see him do it. Next day, James's driver had suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James, ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. All traffic halted, he called. Then he told the fireman what had happened. 2 boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Whew. They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes, he's here. Okay, I'll tell him. The inspector's coming. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope. What for? Wondered the fireman. Search me, but you better get them quickly. The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. Good man, jump in. We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark, he chuckled to himself. But suddenly he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop. Help! Help! We're coming, puffed Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last, he caught up with James. Steady, Edward, called his driver. The inspector was standing on Edward's front, holding the noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it on one of James's buffers. The engine swayed and lurched. But at last, got him, he shouted, and he pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine's speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. So, the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I'm sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting for them. "A fine piece of work," he said. "James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Edward. "It'll be lovely not to clank." It was the splendid day on the splendid morning on the island of Sodor. James was very pleased with himself. His red paint gleamed in the sunshine as he sped along the line. He reached the junction just to see Percy puffing with some trucks. "What are you doing here, Percy? You should be at the station by now. You're late." "I know," said Percy. "These trucks have been troublesome all morning." "That's no excuse, Percy. Sir Topham Hatt is depending on us to be on time. Nothing should stop us engines. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go on my way." And James puffed importantly away. "Bossy boiler," muttered Percy to himself. Soon James arrived at the harbor. It was market day. There were lots of crates of fruits and vegetables that came on ships from faraway lands. James watched as oranges, strawberries, melons, and bananas were loaded into his trucks. Then he set off for the station on the main line. On the way, he saw Thomas. "Really reliable, that's me. Pity the same can't be said for Percy. Goodbye." "What was that about?" asked Annie and Clarabelle. "That was trouble for James. Just you wait and see." Meanwhile, Percy was shunting some trucks into a siding. He was keeping them in good order. But the station master had bad news. "What's happened?" asked Percy's driver. "James's brakes have jammed. We need Percy's help right away." Percy soon set off to the rescue. He found James looking very upset on the main line. Percy couldn't help but laugh. "Got yourself in a jam, eh, James? What you might call a sticky situation?" "Be quiet," huffed James. "It's not funny having jam brakes. And not very reliable either. I am surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines." "That's enough, Percy," said his driver. "Can you push these trucks?" "Of course I can. James has wasted too much time already." James hissed angrily. "Here we go," said Percy. "I'll have to go very quickly to make up for lost time. These big engines are so unreliable." "Careful, Percy," called his driver. But Percy was in a hurry. He didn't realize that he had been changed onto the wrong side. "Watch out, Percy," called his driver and applied the brakes. He had been diverted into another siding. The driver and fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit went all over Percy. Sir Topham had arrived, and he was very cross. "You are not to blame for the points failure, Percy, but I do not run a jam factory." "No, sir." "Yes, sir." That night the shed was silent. Percy and James felt very sorry for themselves, but at last Thomas spoke. "You know," he said to no engine in particular, "we all get into jams sometimes." Still there was silence. Once more, when other engines try to help each other out of a jam, things can still go wrong. "So," said a voice. "So," finished Thomas, "we learned a lot today, and therefore Then came a chorus. We're really useful engines after all.